Good afternoon and welcome to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles and I'm your host here in Harlingen, Texas in the Rio Grande Valley of deep South Texas. A little later in the program, our San Diego correspondent Salvador Rivera will be joining us with our guest for today's program, the founder of MigrantInsider.com, all the way from Washington, D.C., Pablo Manriquez. We're going to talk about the latest from the halls of Congress as things like the DHS funding fight continues. But first, as always, let's take a look at what's trending across the border, starting with some breaking news at the top of this edition today. The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled in favor of California Democrats. On Wednesday, the High Court allowed California to use a new voter-approved congressional map that is favorable to Democrats in this year's elections, rejecting a last-ditch plea from state Republicans and the Trump administration. No justices dissented from the brief order. Now, the justices had previously allowed Texas's Republican-friendly map to be used in 2026, despite a lower court ruling that it likely discriminates on the basis of race. The justices' unsigned order on Wednesday keeps in place districts that are designed to flip up to 5 seats now held by Republicans, part of a tit-for-tat nationwide redistricting battle spurred by President Donald Trump. 700 federal agents will be leaving Minnesota in the coming days. Border Czar Tom Homan says the number of immigration enforcement officers in the state will be reduced after state and local officials agreed to cooperate by turning over immigrants that their local police departments and sheriff's offices arrest. News Nation's Xavier Walton has the latest on the immigration issues in Minneapolis and Capitol Hill.
Movement in Minneapolis. According to Border Czar Tom Homan, there has been significant progress, unprecedented collaboration, and also extremely efficient efforts. Because of that, there's going to be a 700 personnel drawdown of ICE agents, reducing the footprint there in the Twin Cities. He also talked about smarter enforcement, not less enforcement, one single chain of command. Another big talker, the talk of body cameras for all agents on the ground, talk to federal agents in Minneapolis.
Some officers and agents had them, some didn't. That inconsistency was unacceptable, so we moved immediately to prioritize full body cam deployment in the city.
Homan also addressing protesters putting up their own barricades and even checking streets for ICE vehicles, saying it's unlawful and unacceptable. Meantime, local leaders now warning the operation is having ripple effects, especially on public health and children. Families say they're afraid to leave their homes. Community clinics reporting spikes and no-shows. Schools say attendance is dropping as parents keep kids home out of fear.
ICE does not belong in and around our schools, in and around our bus stops.
None of this is normal. None of this is okay. None of this makes Minnesota any safer. None of this adheres to the values of this country.
And roughly 1,100 miles away on Capitol Hill, the brothers of Renee Good, the Minneapolis woman shot and killed by an ICE agent on January 7th, testifying before Congress during a hearing on DHS use of force. At times, they read from their sister's eulogy.
These encounters with federal agents are changing the community and changing many lives, including ours, forever. And I still don't know how to explain to my 4-year-old what these agents are doing when we pass by.
So certainly some emotional testimony. Lawmakers say that will not be the last of the tragic stories they hear coming out of the Twin Cities. As for a complete drawdown, meaning no personnel from the federal government in Minneapolis, Border Czar Tom Homan saying there is no concrete timeline, but he did praise, the cooperation from Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, as well as the Attorney General Keith Ellison. In Dallas, Xavier Walton, News Nation.
Homan was sent to Minnesota to oversee the immigration crackdown after Border Patrol Commander Greg Bovino was removed following the death of 2 Americans at the hands of agents. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem had a news conference in Arizona on the U.S.-Mexico border near the border wall Wednesday morning, where she praised border agents. Noem praised President Donald Trump as well for his policies and thanked Border Patrol and ICE for making America safer, she said. She described the border as chaotic under President Joe Biden and called the situation a humanitarian crisis. After Noem's remarks, awards were presented to immigration agents. Noem then attacked those on the left who have protested actions taken by ICE and spoke on crime committed by immigrants. The event comes in the wake of reporting from Axios that multiple segments of the wall are being held up because Noam has not signed off on them. Officials with the Trump administration have been visiting cities across the country for places to locate new immigrant detention and processing facilities. More than 75,000 migrants were being detained by ICE as of mid-January, up from 40,000 when Trump took office a year earlier, according to federal data released on Tuesday. ICE paid $70 million last month for a vast warehouse facility on the northwestern outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona, according to a deed filed with Maricopa County. In Orlando, the mayor said the city was advised that it has no legal options to halt a possible ICE facility from opening up there. In Merville, Indiana, the town council passed a resolution last week in opposition of ICE converting a 275,000 square foot warehouse into a processing or detention facility. ICE purchased a warehouse northwest of Baltimore for more than $100 million, and in the suburbs of Minneapolis, the owners of 2 warehouses have pulled out of possible ICE deals amid a public outcry. In El Paso County, here in Texas, commissioners on Monday formally expressed opposition to the construction of detention facilities amid reports that ICE is eyeing a warehouse there as well. And that's a look at what's trending across the border. Don't forget, you can always stay up to date on these and all stories impacting the border and beyond on borderreport.com. Time now to bring in our San Diego correspondent and our guest for today's program, here to talk about a few different topics impacting the border and beyond, the founder of MigrantInsider.com, Pablo Manriquez. Salvador?
Well, good morning. We're going to be ICE-centric today, as usually we are. Welcome, Pablo, again. Thank you for being with us. Let's start with this DHS immigration package that's being negotiated in the Senate. Tell us a little bit about what's going on there.
Well, as of right now, it's an enormous mystery. No one knows who is actually negotiating this package. This is one of those situations where immigration as a policy matter arrives in Congress and it steamrolls everybody who touches it. Everybody gets burned when they try and touch immigration policy. And that's what happened with the overall funding package to keep the government open. There were 6 spending bills. One of them was for DHS. The DHS spending bill was negotiated. It was supposed to be negotiated by Senator Katie Britt from Alabama and Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut. But Chris Murphy dropped out of those negotiations within days of them beginning because he felt that Katie Britt was negotiating in bad faith. Katie Britt, a hardline, extreme Republican, anti-immigrant Republican from Alabama, has long wanted to purge the United States of immigrants, and that was what her bill reflected. It included things that were incredibly controversial. For example, a funding increase for ICE, which even members of her own party were like, "Are you serious? We just gave ICE we gave DHS $170 billion through the end of the decade to fund mass deportations." And yet Katie Britt, the Senate Republican negotiator on the appropriations package, was like, well, ICE needs more money. No one agreed, and the bill fell flat on its face. Senator Thune and Mike Johnson ended up having to separate the DHS bill from the other 5 spending bills and give it, instead of a full year of funding, a 2-week resolution where Democrats could negotiate, where Democrats and Republicans in the Senate could negotiate what clawbacks from ICE, what regulations need to be put into place so that ICE and Border Patrol stop their terror campaigns across American cities, most notably in the last month or so in Minneapolis and the Minneapolis area of Minnesota. So to summarize, it's a complete mess. No one knows who is negotiating what and for whom. And meanwhile, Republicans keep saying that ICE needs funding increases, that it would be a national terroristic threat for them to take off their masks. And Democrats keep saying they're killing people in the streets. They're killing citizens in the streets. They're killing immigrants in detention. Something needs to change. So Republicans are sort of getting around to the notion that changes need to be made, that ICE is making them, their party, and their president incredibly unpopular, while Democrats continue to negotiate, but won't say who's negotiating, because every time a Democrat touches immigration policy, like I said before, every time a Republican touches it too, everybody gets burned.
Paulo, realistically, you think these senators, Republicans especially, would be in favor of pulling ICE back, maybe rein them in a little bit, considering public outcry that's going on right now?
I think, yes, there is a sentiment that ICE needs to be reined in, that Border Patrol needs to be reined in. The question is, do they have 60 votes? It's a basic game of arithmetic. And to me, right now, it appears that they do not. They not only do not have 60 votes, they, even if they did, sending it to the House where they would need a simple majority. Again, it's possible, especially since Mike Johnson, after the swearing in of the gentleman from Texas this week, has a 1-seat majority, a razor thin 1-seat majority in the House. There's just a lot of questions as to whether or not it'll pass. What's a lot more likely is that Congress stops funding the Department of Homeland Security. That means that a DHS shutdown, if they pass the deadline on February 13th and no funding bill has been passed, that DHS gets shut out of congressional funding. But like I said before, they are pre-funded through 2029, so it's not going to make ICE go home. It's not going to make Border Patrol go away. And as much as everybody's going to complain, it's not like they're not going to have gas for their vehicles or their helicopters or, laser lights for their weaponry. They have everything that they could possibly need and more through 2029. But that's not what the political rhetoric's going to be. Everybody's going to pretend like DHS, that the government funding, not DHS, is somehow inhibiting national security threats from being taken out of the country. Now, what will happen, I think, and this is something you got to watch out for, is that the next time there's a big natural disaster, because FEMA is rolled into ICE, people are going to say, well, we need to fully fund the Department of Homeland Security because such and such a state got hit by a hurricane or a tornado. And that's the way that ICE is going to be able to maneuver for more funding. They're going to say this hurricane hit Texas or whatever hit Texas, and we need to fund Texas because Texas is a red state and it's controlled by Republicans in Congress. So we need to fund ICE in Minneapolis. It's nonsensical, but that's what you could expect out of our Congress in the next 6 months.
Funny how this representative from Texas didn't have to wait 2 months to get sworn in, right?
Right, and he was sworn in during a shutdown. It was technically a shutdown when he got sworn in, which was the reason Mike Johnson gave for not swearing in Adelita Grijalva for all those months from Arizona, so that he could stop the discharge petition on the Epstein files.
Right. Let's talk about something that Rudy mentioned earlier on, this detention centers that are being built or being considered. Tell us about something that you uncovered that actually involves the U.S. Navy when it comes to this detention center.
Yeah, so back in October, CNN reported that the United States Navy is not only the sort of proverbial sugar daddy or benefactor of the Department of Homeland Security when it comes to these detention centers and that they can finance them if DHS needs money, but they also have the authority basically to commandeer them. They could say, we're the Navy, we're coming in to take over this factory, whether you like it or not. So one of the things we're seeing this week on Capitol Hill is that a lot of Republicans are starting to oppose DHS concentration camps, detention facilities being put in their state, right? They're a Republican, like Roger Wicker just today said, I don't want this detention center in Mississippi, but with the Navy, it's like they could come in. They have authority that DHS doesn't have to be able to basically create, a task force, a task operation that says we're doing this, we're doing it overnight. Overnight, you can have a detention center in your state, in your district, in your town, because they have the muscle of the United States Navy, which has always had more money than anybody, not just the Navy, but the Pentagon generally has always had more money than anybody else in the federal government. So DHS basically not only has now what was a $10 billion slush fund has become a $45 billion contracting slush fund. That was the scoop that I broke on Sunday in migrantinsider.com. But they also have the authority as the Department of Defense to come in and, whether people like it or not, install these facilities in their hometowns.
We're speaking with Pablo Manriquez of migrantinsider.com. We're going to continue the conversation with Pablo on the other side of a quick break, so stay with us. Border Report Live is back in 2 minutes. Welcome back to this edition of Border Report Live. Time now to get back to our conversation with Pablo Manriquez of migrantinsider.com.
Pablo, I wanted to ask you about the ICE saying that I don't need a judge to sign a warrant for me to go and search your house. Let's talk about this warrantless searches. Why does ICE seem to think that it can get away with it?
Well, ICE seems to think that it can get away with everything because Stephen Miller has told them that they have immunity from prosecution. That's completely untrue. They do not have immunity from prosecution. And I think a lot of them are going to find out the hard way once this presidency winds down just how little immunity they have. But the big policy question is, do they need a judicial warrant or an administrative warrant? And yesterday on Capitol Hill, the DHS legislative team was distributing sort of like what they call the fact sheet about that basically arguing that they don't need a judicial warrant. They don't need a warrant signed by a judge, that an administrative warrant signed by somebody at ICE is plenty for them to go to your home, kick in the door, and drag everybody out by the hair. It's one of the most absurd anti-American concepts ever in the history of this country. But ICE is still arguing it because they know that the policy changes that are being negotiated in the Senate could impact their ability to do whatever they want. And, there are a lot of bills out there. Some bills to abolish ICE, some bills to do things like clearly articulate just that these guys don't have immunity. They don't have a qualified immunity, as they say, as law enforcement officers, especially in instances of excessive force. But that is a big question. Like ICE wants to say that it could do whatever it wants to you in your own home, and the Constitution and the law and the American people are like, yeah, no, you don't. But they're still trying to make the case.
Sure. We hear about bills to abolish ICE. How realistic is this happening? Do you think this will ever see the light of day?
I think that ICE is going to be destroyed if there's another Democratic trifecta. Like, put a pin on the calendar for January, what would be January 20th, 2029, because, and I was saying that's the day it'll happen, but there are bills like Sri Thanadar's bill, congressman from Michigan. He just wants to abolish it outright. And the Department of Homeland Security, Jimmy Gomez from California, he's got a bill that basically says we're going to take all the money that ICE has and we're going to give it to affordable housing. And then Delia Ramirez has a little bit more from Chicago. She has a bill that's a little bit more in the weeds that moves things around, but in effect abolishes ICE too, and at least abolishes the enforcement and removal operation at ICE, which is the controversial part of ICE. Now, everybody has been put in the DHS, the DEA, FBI has been put into the enforcement and removal part of ICE, or ERO. But again, that's something that advocates are going to have to wrap their mind around how they talk about it too in the future. To abolish ICE, I mean, part of ICE is like tracking down international sex traffickers, currency manipulation, finding art thieves. Not everything at ICE is breaking in doors and harassing American citizens, immigrants, and everybody else. But yeah, there are bills to do it. I think it could happen. I think that a lot of people are starting to look at how Donald Trump eliminated the USAID, the Department of USAID, out of the State Department. He did it overnight. And Democrats are an antithetical administration to ICE could do the exact same thing with ICE. They could send them all home with no pay. They could sue for their pay, and that could be tied up in the courts for a long time. But meanwhile, no ICE. So it could be done, and it could be done overnight. Whether it gets done is a question of how the elections go over the next few years.
Sure. So we talking to Pablo Manriquez of migrantinsider.com. If you don't have his newsletters, access to his journalism, please do at migrantinsider.com. Always compelling, entertaining, and informative. I did want to ask you about something that you produced. It's a video about Bad Bunny appearing on the Super Bowl halftime show. Tell us about that and how you got some of the representatives, including Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, to be part of this video.
Yeah, so I just launched a YouTube channel, Migrant Insider on YouTube. Please look it up if you haven't already, Migrant Insider on YouTube. I'm going to build it out all year. But I asked a bunch of members of Congress, first of all, to react to the Bad Bunny Super Bowl. And Mike Johnson said, he's like, no, I don't like Bad Bunny. I'd never heard of him before, but I would much rather have Lee Greenwood or somebody like that performing at the Super Bowl. A lot of people got a laugh out of that. Actually, that clip actually made Jimmy Kimmel. And then I asked AOC, I said, AOC, like, what's your favorite Bad Bunny song? She said, for those of you who are Bad Bunny song fans and AOC fans, Bendiciones, which is a song about hope and resiliency in the face of adversity. Bendiciones para todo el mundo, which means blessings for the world in Spanish. And then it was kind of funny. I asked Eric Swalwell about Bad Bunny's comment at the Grammys. Bad Bunny said "ice out" at the Grammys, and it was something that kind of set the political world ablaze. And I asked him, I said, what do you agree with Bad Bunny? And Swalwell from California, he's running for governor right now. He was like, yeah, I totally agree with him. In fact, I have a bill called the Ice Out Bill, which would end qualified immunity for federal agents. I was like, oh, well, that's great. So, Congressman, what's your favorite Bad Bunny song then? Crickets. He didn't know. He had no favorite Bad Bunny song. After consulting with a staffer, he said DTMF, which means debí tirar más fotos. I should have taken more photos, which is, in my opinion, probably my favorite Bad Bunny song of the last year. Although Baile Inolvidable, also fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we keep hearing of the Bad Bunny, the concept, but people perhaps don't really know his music. They just hear he's great. A lot of kids really love the guy, and he is quite entertaining. I always joke that sometimes you really can't understand what he's saying. The lyrics are like, "What did he say?" And but he is quite entertaining, and I know my nieces and nephews love the guy. I've seen him a couple of times, and he is very, very entertaining. I did want to ask you another thing about something that's kind of funny in a way. There's you wrote about someone in the Netherlands who's using biometrics to get back at the ICE agents to expose them, to sort of dox them. Tell us about what's going on there.
Yeah, so there's an Irishman named Dominic Skinner who has a website called the ICE List, and it's at icelist.is. The reason why it's at that obscure .is subdomain is because when he launched it on a .com last year, it got taken down by the Justice Department. People have targeted his servers. People have targeted his domain register. People have basically done everything possible for this guy not to be able to publish the names of ICE agents. Now, he's not doxing these guys. That's important. He's not publishing their addresses. He's not publishing their phone numbers or anything like that. Or personally, he's not publishing their emails and stuff. He's just publishing their names. These are federal agents, and these are the photos that we found of these federal agents on the internet. And so he has this list called the ICE List. And Marsha Blackburn, the senator from Tennessee, wanted him prosecuted for it, only to find out that he lives in the Netherlands. And he's Irish. He's an EU citizen. The United States government has no jurisdiction of this guy, and the souring of relationships between the United States and Europe after Davos make it even less likely for anything to happen to this guy. But what's interesting at this point is that when Alex Preddy was killed, no, it was when Renee Good was killed in Minnesota by the ICE agent. A whistleblower inside DHS provided Dominic Skinner and the ICE List with 4,500 names of agents. Now, at peak capacity, my understanding is that ICE, even after they spend all their money, they only expect to have about 12 to 15,000 agents. So to have the names of 4,500 ICE agents is a huge part of their workforce. And Dominic has been going through it and listing them in a wiki, like a Wikipedia-like format at icelist.com/wiki. So I've interviewed this guy a couple times. I've been interviewing him since last year when he first started publishing the names of ICE agents. There have been instances of severe brutality and excessive force where I've actually consulted the ICE List to find out who I should be reaching out to, like what agents have been involved in some of these incredibly terrible, troubling videos of people being violated. ICE List is like the only place on the internet where you can actually take the actions of a out of control rogue agent and find out what their name is. And that's really important when it comes to lawsuits. You can't sue somebody until you have their name. So in some of these cases, Dominic Skinner is publishing their names and lawsuits are moving forward.
We've been speaking with the founder of MigrantInsider.com, Pablo Manriquez, about a whole bunch of different topics today, as always. And as always, Pablo, it's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate you having me. Thank you. And remember, MigrantInsider.com on YouTube.
All righty, MigrantInsider.com and MigrantInsider.com on YouTube. Make sure to give Pablo a follow today. Stay with us. We got a few more headlines when we return. Border Report Live is back in 2 minutes. Welcome back to this edition of Border Report Live. Got one last headline to tell you about, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture says Mexico is set to deliver 350,000 acre-feet of water to the United States. That is the minimum amount the country is supposed to pay back as part of the 1944 Water Treaty Act. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the U.S. and Mexico will hold monthly meetings to make sure Mexico consistently delivers the water it owes. Real quick, before we go, we wanted to remind you that you can stay informed on the stories shaping the U.S.-Mexico border while you're on your commute home. Maybe you're taking the dog out for a walk or doing some grocery store shopping, because Border Report Live brings you real-time updates, expert insights, and voices from both sides of the border in podcast form. We're available at any of the places at the bottom of your screen. And also wanted to remind you to check out our partners at Political Power Ranker. It's a weekly show tracking the movers, shakers, and rulemakers in American politics. They got some fresh polling for you starting tomorrow morning on Kentucky Senate races and Andy Beshear's popularity in the state. So check it out, Political Power Ranker at abc27.com or your local Next Star station website. For Salvador Rivera in San Diego, I'm Rudy Mireles in Harlingen. We'll see you next time.